Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It brings me, good afternoon. Tap your neighbor and say good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, now that we have everybody's attention, all 450 of us plus, it brings me absolute great pleasure to introduce the senator from Vermont with a capital T-H-E. And I've had the great pleasure of serving as a national surrogate for Senator Bernie Sanders during the 2016 presidential election cycle. And Senator Sanders inspired a generation of folks to dream bigger and to expect more. Senator Sanders is the inspiration for our revolution because what he has understood for his decades of work, that this is a long-distance race. And I'm not sure if the senator knew 50 years ago. He's the youngest, he's the most seasoned millennial around. Let me just put that out there. I'm talking about his work, not his age. Y'all feeling that? I'm talking about his work. But I'm not sure if the senator knew 40 years ago that his work will reveal itself in many iterations, but in moments like this, that it is not just about resistance, it's about persistence. That when he was mayor of Burlington, did he think that this moment will come where there would be 450 progressive candidates all in one space, ready to get out there and bump the world back on behalf of the people? I don't know if he knew that. I don't know if the senator knew that when he was in the House of Representatives that this moment would come. It is not just about resistance, it is about persistence. And when the senator went to the Senate, I don't know if he knew. And I don't know how many of you remember that in 2010, I believe that it was, when the senator was resisting at that time the extension of the Bush tax cuts, 8.5 hours standing up for the people of the United States of America. It's not about resistance, it's about, man, and even after 2016, the senator knew that the mission of making this great country great for everybody is so high that he couldn't get over it. That the mission of ensuring that nobody is left behind, whether they are in Lubbock, Texas, or Cleveland, Ohio, is so low that he couldn't get under it. And the mission to make sure that racial justice and social justice and reforming a criminal justice system that is unjust in many ways, to lift women, to lift our gay, lesbian, transgendered sisters and brothers, community after community after community, is so wide that he couldn't get around it. What Senator Bernie Sanders represents is what I said this morning, that any old blue, I'm talking about Bernie blue, you with me? That any old blue, I'm talking about Bernie blue. So I want you to put your hands together for a public servant who has never given up on the people of this great country, who does not just talk about it. He's not just there when it's popular to be called a progressive. He was there when it's unpopular to be called a progressive. It's called having heart-soul agreement. It's called having courage. It's called having tenacity and the ability to stand up when everybody else just doesn't see it and just doesn't get it. Senator Bernie Sanders awakened the sleeping giants, and we will never, ever go back to sleep again. The world will bump us, but we will bump back. Put your hands together, sisters and brothers, and bring out for Senator Bernie Sanders.
Well, I love Nina, but it's always hard to follow Nina. Let me thank Progressive Change for helping to organize this enormously important event. And let me thank Nina and Our Revolution for working hard on this as well. What you are here today for and what you are doing is making a political revolution. When some of us got involved in the presidential campaign, we had two goals. And let me also thank the many of you who in state after state were involved in that campaign. Thank you very much. What our goals were essentially were twofold. First of all, to demand that we see public policy in this country start working for ordinary Americans and not just the 1%. All right? So we developed an agenda. And we said, what makes sense? What are the problems facing our country? What are the issues that most politicians and media people don't have the guts to talk about? How do we put them on the table? And how do we educate the American people about those issues? So we started the campaign by developing a progressive agenda which said that we are going to deal with the disgrace of having more income and wealth inequality in this country than any other major country on earth. And you know what? People weren't talking about that issue. People weren't talking about the fact that today we have 3 people who own more wealth than the bottom half of the American people. People were not talking about the fact that this country is moving toward an oligarchic form of society where a handful of billionaires like the Koch brothers and their friends are able to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in this midterm election to elect candidates who protect the 1%. People weren't talking about that issue. People were not talking, media was not talking about the fact that the United States was and is the only major country not to guarantee health care to all people as a right. And when we said, you know what, Medicare is a good program, it's a popular program for the elderly in America, why don't we expand it to all people through a Medicare for All single-payer program? Oh, everybody told us how crazy, how extreme, how radical we were. Well, I got news to you. Because of your work and Nina's work and all of our work, last poll that I saw, 59% of the American people believe in Medicare for all. A few years ago in the Senate, I introduced a Medicare for All bill, had 0 co-sponsors. This time, we have 16 co-sponsors. In other words, what was once considered radical is now mainstream. When we ran for office, we picked up on what our friends in the Fight for 15 movement were talking about. And what we said is, if you work 40 hours a week in the United States, you should not be living in poverty. Raise the minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour. Well, a few years ago, Democratic leadership said $15 an hour. My God, you want to double the federal minimum wage. Maybe we could go to $10.10 an hour. Now we have 30 co-sponsors on $15 an hour. And all across the country, communities, cities, and states are passing $15 an hour minimum wage legislation. When we began the campaign, we said that we have a crumbling infrastructure that we can create up to 15 million decent-paying jobs by rebuilding our streets and rebuilding our bridges and our water systems and our rail system and affordable housing. And we needed $1 trillion investment. People said, Bernie, $1 trillion? My God, that's too much money, maybe $400 billion. Democratic Party now believes $1 trillion investment in rebuilding our infrastructure. When we began the campaign, we said that in a competitive global economy, when we talk about public education, kindergarten through 12th grade is not enough. We have got to make public colleges and universities tuition-free. And that we have to deal with the absurdity of millions of our people leaving school deeply in debt. Well, that was also considered to be a radical and crazy idea. Washington Post was had 83 editorials telling us why it was a bad idea. Now you're seeing all over this country, states and cities moving in that direction. And criminal justice reform and the need to legalize marijuana. Oh, a crazy, radical idea happening all across the country. Criminal justice reform, training police officers to understand that lethal force, using your gun, is a last resort, not a first resort, sweeping the country. The need to address the child care crisis in America. Well, I got good news for you. The bill that was passed a few weeks ago doubles funding for the Child Care Development Block Grant Fund. All right, so my point here is that what we brought forth was a progressive agenda, which at the time people thought was radical, was extreme, could not be implemented, not what the American people wanted. And yet, if you look at the issues, whether it's raising the minimum wage, rebuilding our infrastructure, criminal justice reform, no matter what it is, it turns out that the majority of the American people are on our side, that they want a government which works for all people, not just wealthy campaign contributors. So in many respects, on issue number one, transforming the debate, fighting for a progressive agenda, we are winning that fight big time. Thank you for doing that. But the second part of the equation, which is why you are here today with progressive change and with our revolution, is that you understand no matter how good the agenda, no matter how much the American people support that agenda does not take place unless we have elected officials who have the guts to implement that agenda. So what the campaign was and is about, the ongoing campaign, because Nina Turner said it right, it's not about one person, not about Bernie, it's about you. It's about the American people. The second part of what we are trying to do, which is what you are about, which is what the political revolution is about, is involving many millions of people in the political process in a way that we have never seen in the modern history of this country. Now, what the establishment and the big money interests try to do are two things. Number one, obviously, they want to push their agenda of tax breaks for billionaires and cuts to the programs that working people need, huge military budgets, et cetera, et cetera. That's number one. But number two, the more subtle and destructive role that they and the media play is to tell the American people that politics is too complicated, you can't get involved, you don't know enough to run for office. Well, I think, as you know, as a member of the United States Senate, if anyone goes out and takes a look at what my colleagues are doing, what they know, you are aware that anybody can run for any office. Now, I have talked to literally PhDs, really knowledgeable people in education and in other areas. They say, you know, Bernie, I just don't know enough to be on the school board. I don't know enough to be on the city council. Well, take a look at the President of the United States. And be reassured that you know far more than he will know in his best day. All right, but here is the point. The point is the world is very complicated and nobody knows it all, and we all have got to study hard. Tough stuff out there. But if your heart is in the right place, if you believe in love and compassion, if you understand that the function of elected officials is to bring us together, not divide us up, if you believe in economic and social and racial and environmental justice, run for office. Now, my Republican colleagues, their idea of a good election is when nobody votes and big money dominates the process. And that's why all over the country they are working hard on voter suppression, why they vigorously defend this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision. What they want is a dispirited, discouraged population which says, I don't want to vote, it's all crap, I'm not going to get involved. And then the Koch brothers and their billionaire friends pour in huge amounts of money into TV ads. Our job is exactly the opposite. Our job is to grow the voter turnout. Our job is to take big money out of the campaign process by overturning this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision. So what I want to say to you is you begin your campaigns, and I can't speak highly enough of what progressive change and our revolution is doing. It's exactly the right thing to do. There are elements of campaigns that all of you are going to have to learn about. But at the end of the day, what good campaigns are about, and don't let any consultants, let me give you a warning here, all right? Watch out for consultants. There is an entire group of people, large group of people located right here, who make zillions of dollars by consulting. And often their advice is conservative and wrong. Trust your own guts. Trust your own instincts. Trust your heart. Now, what this is about is, number one, depending on what you're running for, obviously, it's people-to-people contact. When I first was elected, I defeated a 5-term incumbent mayor in Burlington, Vermont, because I knocked on thousands and thousands of doors. And at the end of the day, The most important thing you can do is knock on a door and say, hi, I'm Mary Jones. I'm running for state legislature. This is what I believe. That is the most important thing that you can do. So get out. I'm not going to suggest that money is not important. But at the end of the day, face-to-face contact, bringing your friends and your fellow progressives out, knocking on doors with you, is ultimately more important than anything else. Do not spend, as some here in Washington, what have you, your entire lives raising money. All right? Go on out and talk to people and tell them what you believe. Last point that I will make. 4 years ago, in the 2014 midterm elections, when Republicans did fantastically well all over this country, we had the lowest voter turnout since World War II. And that was because soldiers were abroad, not even voting. All over this country, including my own state of Vermont, the average voter turnout was about 37%. 37%. For an enormously important election, 1/3 of the Senate, every member in the House, governors, etc. If we can raise that voter turnout from 37% to 50%, that's not really a very high bar. If we can go out and register millions of new people, young people, working people who have given up on the political process, if you can give those people hope and an agenda that makes sense to them, if you can involve them in the political process, if we can get that vote up to 50%, virtually every single one of you will win your elections. So in this unprecedented moment in American history, when we have the least qualified president in the history of our country, when we have right-wing extremism dominating both the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, many governors' chairs all across this country. In this moment in American history, our job together is to stand up, it is to fight back, it is to bring our brothers and our sisters and our neighbors and our co-workers into the political process. It is to think big, not small. It is to transform America, and that is what you are all about. Best of luck to all of you.
One round of applause as he heads out the door. Woo! All right. Are you feeling inspired?